Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your time. I would like to share with you a little bit about the context. Daria has also already mentioned that we've been working with the brothers and sisters in Latin America, and we're working on specifically on a project about just transition. The amount of solid waste in the continent is huge, and we're expecting 370 million tons of waste in the continent. More than half of that is organic waste. 30% is plastic, metal, cardboard. So all those could be potentially recycled, and the rest are different kinds of wastes. Out of those, out of the whole waste, half of it go to landmines, which means, as we just heard from the previous speaker, the consequence on the emissions is pretty much the same. So the policy to mitigate climate impact by reducing the methane that is exposed by illegal landmines will be a lot more efficient than actually putting all the effort into transport or other measures in doing that just transition. In Latin America, cities concentrate a huge amount of waste, and they are directly linked with the consumption of the cities. Latin American economy has not managed to separate itself from solid fuels. And that's why in big Latin American cities, we have an average more than 1.10 kilos of waste per person. It's almost 1.3, which is the average in Europe. But the poorest capitals in Latin America are around 0.5 or 0.3. In Guatemala, 0.45, Cuba, 65, 67, Chile, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, they're around 116. And in the capital cities is around 120. The volume of waste is directly linked with the efficiency of the economy, but as it's also linked with the unequal distribution of wealth. Those two issues were already mentioned by Sandra. It means that municipalities don't have enough money, and also that 50% of the waste is not duly managed, and they're just thrown into illegal landmines. And just in Argentina, we're talking around 5,000 illegal landmines, and that means 1 million hectares of contaminated land. So if we don't strengthen public services, we're still going to be inefficient. And at the same time, we also have another problem, and it is that the solution that we're offering, they're not efficient at the local scale because we don't have enough scale. We've talked about this with Darian previously. The main cities in Latin America are producing waste at such a pace that the scale makes it sustainable when at the end you can separate and recycle and reuse. But in the rest of the metropolitan areas, if we don't work on a regional basis, if different municipalities don't work together, if they don't join efforts, we run the risk of what's actually happening is that we are not capable of financing it because one little local government cannot finance it, and then they just leave it in the hands of the private sector. So you're only changing who's responsible for that, but we're not becoming more efficient. What's happening in Argentina is that the 97% of the population has a waste management system, but only 70% has a real management, like it is official, the management that they do. The rest goes to illegal landmines. There are only 30 villages 30 cities, when there are around 1,800 municipalities in Argentina. So there is such a discrepancy in the waste management. Bogotá, Medellín, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Santiago. The situation is pretty much the same. We need to encourage governments and local communities to work in consortium, in cooperatives, to work together. And there they can sit down and think about the technologies that they can use. Last decade, international institutions were offering solutions to separate and to recycle waste. So what they were doing is that they were proposing loans at preferential rates so they could install facilities. Just in Buenos Aires, we have 10 separation plants. These are municipalities with less than 50,000 people. 4 years later, none of those plants could be working. Why? Because they didn't have enough money, because they didn't have enough volume, but they didn't have enough money either. It's funny, but some municipalities just do not have enough waste to get the plant going. So when they don't have enough waste, the salaries that will come out of the functioning of that plant are just unsustainable. And then there are two types of workers: those who have training, who work in the main cities where they have a huge volume, and then they can work throughout the whole chain of management of the waste. That's what happens in Buenos Aires. But that's 2% of the population in Argentina. It's only 2%. But in those 2%, there's 30% of the population and a huge part of the internal net product of the country. That means that the transport doesn't have to travel, the waste doesn't have to travel too far to be treated. And then in those same plants, in those same centers, you can separate, you can recycle, you can produce biogas, you can compost, you can do everything because you have enough volume. Whereas in the rest of the cities, in the rest of the country, there are two problems. There's not enough volume, and then the cost is such that is not even safe. It's not even sure that we can produce anything. And then, of course, as a consequence of that, we have illegal landmines. And as the previous speaker mentioned, the economic crisis is always there in Latin America. It's always there. And that means that those illegal landmines are also a source of wealth for many populations who do not have any source of resource. They do not have any other resources. Which is another problem in itself. So because we don't have much time, I'll try to sum up. We could have a really positive impact in national strategies to mitigate climate change. We have a growth of 6% of the greenhouse gases. And that means that in Latin America, we really need to watch this because of the extent of the illegal landmines, we're actually taking out tons of organic waste and inorganic waste that should not be, in principle, producing any emissions. But because they're burned to obtain other metals, they're also emitting carbon dioxide. So we need to have policies that allow us to officialize all those clandestine workers in the landmines. And then governments and civil society should definitely push the governments to offer better quality services. Because I'll give you an example. I'll tell you what happens in Mexico City. There are 10,000 volunteers who actually take care of collecting and separating the waste. And what they get is just a tip. It's a tip. It's around $5 per day. That's the average that they're proposing, they're estimating from the international institutions. The other way of remunerating these workers is what happens in Bogotá. There is actually a tax that you pay when you pay your utilities. And that tax goes to those people, or sometimes on the electrical bill. Of course, this is a step forward, but still, you know, we're not formalizing, we're not officializing the work of these people. So this could be green jobs, but it's not decent work, because all these workers don't have any freedom of association. They have no right to collective bargain. So they actually depend on the goodwill of the local government. And although it's a paradox, they also depend on the lack of programming on the management of solid waste. I don't want to take more time from you, but Daria, I'm here if you need anything. Oh, no, you're not taking time from us. Quite on the contrary. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the details. Thank you for a very enriching report. We'll have to go through it again and listen to every single detail that you mentioned. Thank you so much. And I insist, it's not just the finance, it's not just the funds, it's also decent work. That's what allows all workers in public sector, and that goes from waste management to any first line workers. If they don't have access to labor rights, if they don't have decent working conditions, they just cannot carry out the work. It will not be efficient. I just wanted to add two more items. We just created a group for just transition that is coordinated by Juan Diego. And I think we can do a great job, because we're actually exchanging good practices in the different sectors: water, waste, local government, and they're actually enriching all our experiences. I actually truly believe that we can put together a group, a work group, a research and a learning group that would improve skills for all of us. And something else that I wanted to say is that all this work in waste management, in my experience, as I was saying, we've actually managed to produce biogas and carbon abundance, and we've actually produced new items, new products. I told you about the illegal landmines, and actually, if the waste workers were well trained, they could actually work on recovering wetlands, for instance. We see that in Rio de la Plata. We've actually managed to recuperate 50 hectares that were contaminated, and we've been using our own technology. We've been using our local technology, the resources that we had. If we manage to close that virtuous circle, we're also offering an ecosystem service. And if we look at it from the point of view of climate change mitigation, we're actually turning an illegal landmine into a carbon soaker. So, you know, we can really work. If we train those workers, we can really go really far.